Hi, I'm your host, Fabrice Grinda, and welcome to episode 1 of Playing with Unicorns. I guess before I address the topic du jour, I wanted to touch upon briefly upon why I decided to create this channel. And basically, I want to share everything I learned over the last 22 years as an entrepreneur, angel investor, and venture capitalist. Basically, put you in a position to know everything I wish I knew when I first started as an entrepreneur to avoid all the common mistakes. Now, there are a number of live streaming shows and podcasts out there, but the way they're structured is typically a host interviewing amazing guests. And you get a lot of value out of these, but I felt it was a bit hard to perhaps distill specific information. And so this is an experiment to see if a live streaming show where there's one very specific topic per week, it could be rather broad like this week on fundraising, or really specific on how do you set up tests for landing pages to evaluate customer acquisition costs, where I present a topic, I may have guests, and then ultimately open it up to the audience for questions and answers, and basically see how it goes. I'd like the live streaming format. I think it's going to be more fun, interactive, and will allow for a lot of flexibility, like having guests or special people present things, maybe do a fun evaluation round where people pitch me ideas and I give them feedback and on perspective. And perhaps if I can even convince some of our portfolio companies, or not portfolio companies, but companies pitching us for capital to do a live pitch so you can see exactly how a venture capital evaluation goes, that would be fun. No promises, obviously it requires other people's consent, but it should be interesting. I guess a few caveats to note before we get started. First one is this is unscripted, unedited, and completely self-filmed. So it's a labor of love. The real purpose is to pay it forward to the venture community that has given so much to me and the tech community at large. And I don't really have a real objective, but the production values are not going to be very high. There are going to be no special jazzy effects. It'll really be about the content that I try to produce to be as helpful as possible to entrepreneurs. Which brings me to the second point of what this channel is about. Entrepreneurship covers many things, and it's a broad genre, and there are many forms of entrepreneurs. If you run a corner grocery store, you're an entrepreneur. If you have a Shopify store, you're an entrepreneur. If you're running a franchise of whatever product it may be, you're an entrepreneur. And these are frankly the lifeblood of the US economy. It's true of like influencers as well. But this is not the type of entrepreneurship that I will be covering on this channel. I will focus on a very specific type of entrepreneurship, which is venture-backed and startups, or entrepreneurs who want to build venture-backed startups that can reach this hopefully not just mythical status of unicorns of being worth $1 billion or more. So companies that can grow really rapidly and frankly transform the societies we live in, that try to harness the deflationary power of technology to improve people's purchasing power, to improve user experiences and make life better. So this introduction aside, let's get on to the topic du jour. So I decided to start with fundraising because it's really a fundamental, universal concern that every entrepreneur faces. You start fundraising from the first day you start your company, and frankly, you're always fundraising. You may have just closed your round of fundraising. You're still looking for capital because until you reach profitability and you've gotten to the point where you're a master of your own destiny, you depend on others to fund your idea. And while it is universal, it's probably the one category that is the most misunderstood by entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs writ large. And I see that because weekly I get dozens, sometimes hundreds of emails of people saying, I have this great idea, I just now need capital to go and develop it or deploy it. Or sometimes I'm copied or BCC'd on emails sent to hundreds of venture capitalists. And this goes to the issue that it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of a few issues. First of all, there are a set of unwritten rules in the venture capital world in terms of who you approach, when, and how. And of course, being unwritten, it's not surprising that many entrepreneurs fail at following the rules of the game because they have not been initiated in this secret society. So I will do my best to try to explain what they are today. Second is there is a perspective that perhaps you just email these hundreds of venture capitalists and one of them this idea will resonate with. And it doesn't really work like that because there's not really venture capitalists writ large. really is a lot of specificity with different firms focusing different sectors, different stages. And so the idea that you're going to send an email to someone like General Atlantic that wants to be writing a $250 million check in a late stage startup, and at the same time you're emailing someone like First Rank Capital that wants to be your first institutional investor writing a few $1 million in your startup to help you scale is a little bit ridiculous. And so I'm going to try to give you the lay of the land, who are the different players who do what, when to approach them, and how to approach them. But perhaps let's start with the most fundamental mistake, which is I would not recommend people immediately approach venture capitalists, asking for capital once they have an idea. And that's because of what the nature of entrepreneurship really is. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're an aspiring entrepreneur, you really are taking two types of risks. You're taking the risk that you can actually execute in this idea, so execution risk, and that has a number of subcategories to it. Like, are you going to be able? Well, and the second big category is idea risk. Is the idea going to work? Now, in execution risk, which is probably the main reason most people fail, there are a number of things. Are you as an entrepreneur going to be able to fundraise, which we'll touch upon later today? Are you going to be able to build an amazing team? Or are you going to be able to build and develop the product? Are you going to do the partnerships that allow you to scale? And there are a lot of other elements to that. And the second component is idea risk. Do people want your idea? Do you get product market fit? Or are you able to make it profitable? Do you have positive unit economics? And are you able to grow it? Can you find a scalable, profitable customer acquisition channel? Now, venture capitalists want to fund you to scale your business, but they actually want you to limit those risks. They want to take as little of the risk on the execution side and on the idea side as possible. And so before they invest in you, they try to use signals to see whether or not you're going to be able to execute in these ideas. And by the way, the genius is in the execution of the idea, not the idea itself. Ideas are a dime a dozen, and in fact, very often it's interesting, they kind of are in the air. We get 20 people pitching us the exact same idea at the same time, and the way we choose is who is going to execute on that idea the best. And by the way, while I cover the risks, these are the main reasons companies fail. Either they fail to execute or they don't find product market fit. It's not things, whereas if you ask entrepreneurs what they worry about the most, they worry about things like competitive risk or like, oh, someone is going to do it better, faster, bigger than me. The reality is that is not what kills most businesses. That's why I didn't even put it in the list. It is a risk, but it's not one of the main risks. So what venture capitalists are going to do before they evaluate your startup is use signals to see, do I think this individual can actually succeed? And the old signals used to be, oh, did they go to Stanford and study computer science? Or perhaps they were a product manager, or they were a P&L manager or owner at a large late-stage startup like Uber, Instacart, or Airbnb. And that's great. Or maybe you're a second-time entrepreneur. You've done it before. And that's the case. Once you have your idea, you can probably go and try to raise money from venture capitalists. But for most people, you need to demonstrate that you're going to be able to execute. You're minimizing the execution risk and the idea risk for the venture capitalist. So way before you ever talk to a venture capitalist, you need to de-risk it for them in a way. And the way to do that is to execute. Execute on both levels. Execute on testing the idea and making sure that it is really as worthwhile as you thought it was, and execute on building it. And so typically you need some capital, though not necessarily a lot, to get going. And so I'm breaking down here all the different stages at which you require funding and who I would approach one. So you just have your idea and you want to get going. I would not approach a venture capitalist this time unless you have a few of these special edge cases, circumstances where you're connected to them for some reason, you have exactly the right pedigree that they happen to be looking for. And yes, it's perhaps unfair that there's a bias towards computer science graduates from Stanford, but it is what it is, and we have to make do. And so let's use the other tools at our disposal to increase the probability that they'll say yes once you approach them. And I will also describe when you should do that and how you should do that. So you have your idea, and obviously you're not live yet, and now you need to get going. Now the good news is in 2020, it's cheaper than it's ever been to build a startup. I mean, when I first got going in 1998, I needed to get Oracle database licenses and Microsoft web servers, and most of my tech team was actually building infrastructure. There was no such thing as AWS or open source. But today, with the open source revolution, with the low code and no code revolution, you can essentially build any startup, any tech, and you can get a minimum viable product out, or MVP, with probably 50K or less. And so the amount of capital you really need is very limited. Now, even 50K can seem like a lot of money and you can actually do it for, frankly, often zero. You can teach yourself to code. You can use tools, like if you were selling something in the direct-to-consumer channel, like say like Shopify, that allow you to set up yourself very, very cheaply. And frankly, even the tests you need to do on the marketing to check your landing pages and whether the customer acquisition channels work, you can spend $1,000 and get statistically significant results. So. And of course, another traditional approach is you partner with people. You get co-founders that bring the skills that you don't have, and if you can't afford to pay them, and none of you can afford to pay yourselves, you provide them with equity. So typically, this first round of capital, because you probably still need some to incorporate and do the tests, et cetera, comes from the 3 Fs: fools, friends, and family. Now, the amount you typically raise is like $50K, $100K, it's less than $250,000. And you don't want to lose a lot of money from someone. And so, and you need to remember, the 5-year survival rate of a startup is 7%. So there's a 93% probability your idea will fail. And by the way, those are startups that have already raised over $500,000. So you're launching this before this. The probability of failure is probably 99%. And so don't get 100K from someone, not to mention there's not that many people that have 100K to give. Instead, go to 10 friends and get $3,000 each. That's 30K, which is more than enough, frankly, to build a minimum viable product and do tests. But don't sell it as, oh, this is an opportunity for you to make a lot of money. This is really an adventure we're all going on. This is going to be a fun experiment. We're going to try to disrupt this industry or category or launch this new product. It'll be fun. There'll be a lot of learnings. Most likely, you're going to lose it all. So by the way, only give me money that you can afford to lose. But it's going to be a fun project and adventure that we're on together. And the reason it's important for you to do this test is the process of pitching your friends and family will help you in pitching the idea and refining your pitch when you start meeting venture capitalists. Again, it'll start addressing one of the issues: can you fundraise? And if you can actually fundraise from friends and family that are an easier audience in a way than venture capitalists, that helps you along the way. Are you able to convince other people to work with you? Are you building your original team? And again, if you're able to do that, it de-risks the idea that you're going to be able to execute. And are you able to use very limited resources, be they people's sweat equity or little cash, to hire developers on Upwork or elsewhere? And I will create a section where I will have an episode in the future on how to build a minimum viable product for $25,000 or less to actually execute. Once you've demonstrated that, I would spend a few $1,000s on proving that the market works, that there is an idea there that is viable and that makes sense. And once you've done that, you've kind of de-risked. So the money you're raising at this point is really early execution, building the minimum viable product, doing the early tests. And as I said, usually raise 50 to 250K from these fools, friends, and family. We're all going this adventure together, raising like 1K from this person, 5K from this person, et cetera. Valuations vary, but I'd say the pre-money valuation typically is $1 to $3 million. And the way pre-money works, it means that the valuation does not include the money that is being put in. So if you're raising 250K at a 1 million pre-money valuation, the investors are not getting 25%. They're actually getting 1.25. They're getting 250,000 divided by 1.25, which is like 20%. Now, you've done all this. You've actually launched. You have a minimum viable product. You've confirmed that your idea is valid. You have the early team. Now you need to scale up your idea. And so this is when you start talking to. You're at the pre-seed stage, which is also called the angel stage. Now, you have no traction. Essentially, you're at launch. You've just done a few tests, and you now need the money to scale. And the reason that's goes to the essence of what I said earlier. What venture capitalists want to fund is scale you. Now, the reality is there are very few venture capitalists that play at this stage. The funds for which it makes sense to play there are small funds. And most funds and most venture capitalists over the last few years, for reasons I will elaborate on another show, have raised more and more capital. And so most of the people that you're raising from right now are angels. And now in every major city, there are angel groups. There are lists of angels and people you can reach out to. And there are a few specific pre-seed funds out there that will write somewhat larger checks. So most of the angels will be writing 25K, 50, 100K checks. But at this stage, you're usually raising 750K, $1 million. And frankly, again, if you find the right angels and you have the right pitch and story, if you get 10 times 100K, you have your $1 million. Maybe 20 times 50K, but that works as well. Now, there, as I said, a few pre-seed funds like a Amplify, Notion that are amazing and definitely worth talking to. Now, there are a few alternatives people can take. They can join accelerator programs. They can join incubators. They can work with startup studios. I'll detail those and how they work in another show dedicated to the different models. It's another path, but for now, I'll just stick to the traditional fundraising from angels and venture capitalists. So at this point, you're raising 750K, and really you're launching. And you're launching and trying to scale the business to the point that you get to the next stage. Now, at this point, and frankly for the next few rounds, you're going to be losing money. You're not going to be able to cover your fixed costs. And so the point of each of these rounds is to get you to the next round. And you need to think through, and except for the love money to pre-seed, which can be much shorter, the expectation, and again, it's a market expectation of the type of growth we're expecting to see, is that there's about 18 months between each round. So you're raising money for 18 months to get to the scale that is sufficient to get you your next round. And usually once you're 12 months in and you're tracking, this is when you're going to go and start approaching venture capitalists at the next stage. So at this point, as I said, you're raising $750,000 to $1 million, and you're raising at a valuation pre-money of $3 to $5 million. And again, it's typical. There are exceptions. If you're a second-time founder, you might warrant a larger amount of capital, but this is more or less the ballpark. So now you've launched, you've scaled, and you have a certain amount of traction. And now you're raising your seed rounds. So now you have like I'd call early product market fit. Now, for you to be ready for your seed round, there's an expectation of traction that most people have. Now, the issue, of course, is the numbers really vary based on the category you're in. It's a somewhat different number if you're a B2B SaaS business with a 95% gross margin than if you're a marketplace business that takes a 15% commission that then has a margin on that, usually like 66%, or if you're an e-commerce business. Now, to make the numbers as comparable as possible, I'm going to use net revenues here. And net revenues means the amount that you as a startup are taking. So in the marketplace world, a prototypical marketplace that's ready for seed would be doing about 150K a month in gross sales. They would take, let's say, 20%, which is 30K, and they'd fall in that category. They would then be ready to go and raise their seed round. In the B2B SaaS business, it'd be a company that's doing 30K in monthly recurring SaaS revenues, would also put them in a stage where they're ready to raise their seed round. In e-commerce, it's a little bit more complicated. I'd say the numbers need to be a bit higher. The way I would look at the correct number, I'd say it's your gross revenues minus your cost of goods sold, minus all the costs of delivery, shipping, returns, et cetera. And that net revenue that's left, and ideally there's something left, it should be in that 10 to 50K range, probably a little bit higher, gives you a sense of the correct level of traction. So there is that expectation of traction. Because again, venture capitalists preferably want to fund your scaling. And so if you've de-risked it by getting to that point, you're going to be rather successful. Now, the type of funds that operate at this stage, of course, is FJ Labs, my fund. This is really your bread and butter. Again, there are not as many as you might otherwise think, but there are people that are really specialized at that stage. And the names are like Floodgate, First Round, Uncork, Slow Ventures, all amazing funds who will actually come and help you and get to the next stage. And again, the objective of this round is to take you to the next stage. So you need to scale. And frankly, what you're going to be scaling with attractive unit economics, or at least reasonable unit economics, is those net revenue numbers that are currently at 10 to 50K. So to get there, or to do that, you raise 2 to 4 million. Rather broad range. I mean, the standard deviation here is rather large. And you're raising at a 6 to 12 million pre-money valuation. Now with that, you've demonstrated product market fit, and you've reached 50 to 250K in net revenues. It's now time to go for your Series A. Give you a sense of what that would mean for a marketplace business, which is what we focus on. A company that's doing maybe $1 million a month in GMV and taking 15% take rate, that's 150K a month net revenues, would be in that ballpark. So 650K a month, $1 million a month if you're in gross sales with that take rate. Now you're ready if you have good unit economics. And what I define as good unit economics, and I'll do another episode on unit economics and how venture capitalists evaluate startups, is ideally you recoup your customer acquisition costs in the first 6 months, and over the first 18 months, you 3x on a net contribution margin your customer acquisition costs. And who knows what the long-term value of the customer is? Most likely you haven't been live for more than 18 months anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, the people you raise from at this stage, or a set of funds like FJ Labs, we still operate here and still are bread and butter, especially the A. There are a few funds that are specific to the A, like Benchmark, but most of the other funds, and those are the big name funds that you probably have heard of, operate in both stages, and they do both the A and the B, and that's like Unisquare Ventures, General Catalyst, Bessemer, Founders Fund, Kleiner Perkins, frankly, Sequoia, Greylock, Andreessen Horowitz. All the big names really play here, and that's been the bread and butter of venture capitalists forever, and this is where you're going to be able to really scale your business. I mean, most companies or most ideas have probably died before then, but this is really the make it and break it moment. Or are you going to be able to go from a nice business to a really large business that has a shot of attaining this unicorn status? So of course, the use of these funds has to scale. Typical Series A, and again, massive standard deviation, many exceptions on both sides, but it's 5 to 10 million, and you're raising it at 15 to 30 million pre-money valuation. And with that, of course, you want to get to your Series B. At this point, you have good economics, and you can choose. You can choose to either keep growing the business and build a much larger business, or become master of your destiny and reach profitability. And again, there's an 18-month time period between the A and the B, where you're growing, as I said, the gross merchandise volume, let's say from like 650K to like 2 million a month, and your net revenues then are going from, so if you're doing 2 million a month, you're doing 20%, like 400K, so 200K to 1 million. And again, you keep growing really rapidly or become profitable. And at this point, you raise your Series B from the same set of characters as before. You raise 15 to 25 million at a 40 to 80 million pre-money valuation. And after that, it depends, right? But usually people have a real expectation, then you're on path to your IPO or exit, and then you can keep growing. And the numbers get a lot larger. I mean, there are companies that are like Series G, Z, I don't know about Z, but definitely G, H, I, and beyond. And you can raise, lots of capital. And there you have names like General Atlantic or DSC or Cotu, and the check sizes could be 50 million, 100 million, et cetera. I mean, obviously depends if it's the C or the D. Gives you a sense of the lay of the land. Now the way, how and when to approach venture capitalists, as I said, you're ready to de-risk, you're ready to have the relevant traction, and you approach the right VC for your stage. Now, obviously, if you already have angels, or if you have a pre-seed fund invested in you, they will help you with these introductions. But regardless, you can probably find a way in. Ideally, you get a warm lead, and it's not all that hard. Like, find the VCs that are right for your stage. So let's say typically you're ready to go to first seed round. There's lists of seed round VCs. Look at the ones that focus on the type of businesses you're building. At FJ Labs, we're focused on marketplaces. So don't send us hardware companies or biotech companies. But there are many venture capitalists specific for this category. And then look at the team of the people that work there, go to LinkedIn, and see if you have common connections with any of them. And the way the universe works, we're most typically connected to actually a lot of people out there. And so I would focus on finding people that you can introduce you. And it frankly doesn't matter if that person is an associate or a principal, like just get a way in. And when you contact them, give them enough information to make a response. So explain what type of business you're building, explain why you're building it, and why it's a perfect fit for them, both in stage and category, and why you were interested in them specifically. So it's not and I would do that even for the person you know that will be doing the introduction, because it makes it easy for them to then ask if it's relevant for them. Now, if for whatever reason you're not well connected at all and you can't find anyone that you're generally connected to, it is okay to do cold emails, but again, be very thoughtful. Not a blast email to hundreds of different firms. It's to a specific individual, a specific firm that you're contacting because they are on the board or they're investors in companies that are related or relevant. And you give them enough information in that email to show that you've done your homework, that you actually know what they like to invest in, and that you're relevant for them in terms of stage and category to make the decision. Now, when it comes to the love money, probably something I should mention earlier, when I said, oh, you raise like $3K from like 10 different people, most people are like, wait a minute, I don't necessarily know that many people that can give me 3K or 1K or 2K. To the extent you're a college graduate, and chances are if you're an entrepreneur you are, but obviously not. I would go to the friends that chose path that are more, that's for whatever reason society rewards from a financial perspective. Now they're not, it's not necessarily fair that those are the case, but like go to the doctors, the lawyers, the bankers, the management consultants. They're more likely to have a few $1,000s, and frankly they might think it's fun to be part and involved in this adventure, given that I think many of them would rather be entrepreneurs than be in traditional professions. And so, yeah, hopefully this gives you a lay of the land of who to raise from, what to raise from whom and when. And let's see if you guys have any questions. So Alexis is asking, how often can a founder cash out between the seed and the Series A? The reality is rarely often. Very, very rarely. In fact, it's very atypical for a founder to be able to cash out until the C at the earliest, because you don't want to reward people until it's really proven. Now, they may have liquidity needs based on their personal circumstances, but you don't want to give people exit unless you think you're yourself as an investor going to get an exit. And so if you think the company is going great and therefore there's a clear path to profitability, there's a clear path to an acquisition in the future or an IPO, it's okay to allow founders to sell part of their stake, but that's rarely before the Series B. Frankly, it's rarely before the Series C. So it's very rare that founders can cash out. Now, the difference, or the way you address potentially liquidity concerns, is while people often don't really pay themselves in the pre-seed round or the seed round, once you get to the A, most founders get like 100K to 120K or 130K a year in salary, which allows them not to have a great life, especially if they live in a major city, but at least to cover like basic life expenses. So Sad is asking if the most challenging state is pre-seed to seed. I'd say not really. Probably the most challenging state is actually even getting up and running. Like most ideas probably fail as you start. You think you have an amazing idea, and by the way, I would not just have an amazing idea, let's launch. There's a lot of testing I would do to verify and validate the idea, and I'll do another episode on exactly how to pick ideas and how to evaluate them, et cetera, before you launch. But most ideas probably die in that phase. And then once you have this idea, you pull the trigger. I suspect most ideas actually fail in that love money phase, because most people realize, oh, I'm not necessarily as good as I thought it would be, or this is not as fun as I thought it would be from a life perspective. I mean, these things have a tendency to be all-encompassing. And so if you do it because you love it, that's absolutely amazing, and then you're not really working. But for many people, it's actually work, or it's really hard. And the reality is, it is hard. It is, a lot of it feels like eating glass, but for a greater cause, and I think for something that is ultimately fun. But most ideas die there because you can't convince people to give you money. You can't convince people to work with you. You don't have the technical skills required, or frankly, the assumptions you made about why the business was attractive don't pan out. Now, once you're funded, frankly, every stage is hard. I would go to raise capital, as I said, like once it looks like you're going to be ready from a stage perspective, about 6 months before you run out of cash, so you're not like desperate. And the way to do it professionally is to run a process. So let's say you have a list of these investors you want to reach out to, and it doesn't matter if it's pre-seed, seed, A, B, C, et cetera. You want to be reaching out to people at the same time and have the conversations be at the same stage. Otherwise, you're going to get a term sheet from someone while you're just at the beginning of conversations with others. And so you should manage this process very diligently. Like I would have a tracker or a spreadsheet where the name of the VCs, which stage you're at, who you're talking to, and it's really a funnel, right? You start with many investors to get down to the 1 or 2 that you ultimately need. But I would run this as the way you run a specific branch of your company. It is a quasi full-time job to be fundraising, and as a founder, frankly, you're always going to be fundraising. You may have just closed your round. You're going to keep having friendly conversations with other VCs. So Manana is asking, how does one fundraise through Zoom pitches, and what are the post-COVID implications or questions in the world? So for many venture capitalists, I guess the partner meeting where you're presenting all the partners was probably the norm in person. For us at FJ Labs, actually, most of the people we back, we're doing on Zoom before. And so I guess the approach we've always taken of evaluating people through Zoom has kind of become the norm in the industry. And today, everyone does evaluations through Zoom. Now, in the more traditional firms, I suppose, they take more time because it takes them longer to get to know you, and they may ask for more information. But it's really moved rather smoothly because at the end of the day, yes, it helps to meet people in person, but the information you convey, the approach you have, how eloquent you are, the data of the underlying data of your business don't really change. And so that has changed pretty rapidly. And post-COVID, have things changed? Frankly, the irony here is crises on large accelerate underlying trends. And there was already an underlying trend towards things becoming more digital and going online. And what COVID has done is actually accelerated that. And so if I look at our portfolio, and we have about 500 companies still active out of over 600 investments, probably a third of them are massively benefiting from COVID because people are now only buying online things they were buying offline. A third of them probably doing marginally better, and a third, or not a third, like say 30% much better, 30% better, 30% flat. Now 10% are really hurt, and those are the companies that are in the sectors that are disproportionately affected by COVID. And so anything in tourism, anything in offline events, some of these have literally gone to zero. And so it's sad. So to the extent your idea is not related or specific to something really impacted negatively by COVID, I'd say it's at least neutral, if not positive, because there's an acceleration of digitalization. I mean, we're now seeing in the US for the first time telemedicine becoming large and relevant, online education becoming large and relevant in ways that was not conceivable, frankly, a year ago. It was already an underlying trend, but it was moving slowly, and it's accelerated dramatically. How do we find the 20-year-old Fabrices out there today, and how do we get them on our team? You know, it's interesting. Like, I worried as a 20-year-old that I wouldn't be taken very seriously if I joined a startup, or if I built a startup, I thought I would fail. And so instead, I went to McKinsey and Company to work in a consulting company to basically learn business. I'd built a startup in college, and it helped pay for college, in fact. But it was a sole proprietorship, and I didn't really know how to manage a team. And so I left Princeton, and I was 21. Yes, I was like top of my class, but I was super shy, introverted, socially awkward, didn't have the oral and written communication skills or public speaking skills that I thought I would need. And so McKinsey was kind of like business school, except they pay you. And that was super fun. And frankly, I learned a lot there, and I was really happy I did that. Now, today, it's so much cheaper and easier to launch a startup. I don't think there's a wrong path, which, by the way, goes to the nature of risk. Many people are afraid to become entrepreneurs because they're like, wait a minute, what happens if I fail? Now, there are many people who should not become entrepreneurs if they can't afford to fail. So if you have massive amounts of debt, if because of your personal life circumstances, you don't have a safety net, then it probably doesn't make sense to be a tech entrepreneur. But the reality is, if you went to a great school, you are going to be valued and valuable. And so, okay, you went bankrupt, you failed, you lost 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life. Doesn't matter. You had an amazing time. The experiences you have are probably super relevant. All the employers will want to hire you, and you'll have had a more interesting life than others, and probably you can bring a lot of that to bear. And so, most people are risk averse, but this society rewards taking marginally, and I really think it's marginally more risk, so much more than disproportionately more than it is frankly warranted. And if you take this little extra amount of risk, you can do so much better. But frankly, more importantly, I never started a startup because I wanted to make money. I started because I like creating something out of nothing, and my other creative outlets I really sucked at. I can't paint, I can't sing, I can't dance. I love writing, I love speaking, obviously, but there's something magical about like creating something and bringing it into existence and making and then having users use it and interacting with them, and that I could not get that thrill anywhere. And so I didn't consider and I hated having a boss. So I didn't consider myself particularly employable, and it made sense to do that. And I think that's all the more true today, where the passion economy, even if you're not building a venture-backed scalable business, allows you to find these jobs that are right for you. Whether you're on Cameo, if you're like a second or third tier celebrity, if you're selling things on Etsy, if you like to make things. And so it's extraordinary to be living in the world we live in today. What would valuations, net revenue, and fundraising look like at different stages of the funding cycle? So Guillaume, I presented this earlier, but let me put the screen, the presentation in full screen so you get a sense of it. I will probably put the slide on my blog as well, this way people get a sense. Now, as I said, the revenues here are net revenues, and so it'd be very different numbers if you're looking at gross sales for a marketplace, for instance. But the problem is, the reason the gross sales is not comparable is it's very different if a marketplace takes 50% versus one that takes 1%, which might be more common in the B2B space. Likewise, in the e-commerce world, a company that has a 70% gross margin would have very different valuations than one that is selling other people's products and ends up with a 20% gross margin. So these ranges are rather wide, and there are always exceptions. In fact, the exceptions that have a tendency to make the news are the ones where the company is doing so amazingly well that perhaps their Series A looks like a Series B, or their Series B looks like a Series C. But make no mistake, these are the exceptions, not the rule. I'm giving you the numbers closer to the median here for each of the categories. Video game startups, I sadly cannot comment on. I actually don't know what the numbers look like. To clarify off better, yes, how many times? Let's see what other questions we have here. Sorry, the chat. Maybe this will be best from a view perspective, so I can see more questions. I think that might be it for today. Well, thank you for tuning in, and If you like this, put a like, and frankly, comment. I'm looking for ideas for topics for the upcoming weeks, and so I'll try to deliver on what you guys want and ask for. Thank you for checking in, and I look forward to speaking to you next week.